everybody loves the Jesus and the foot washing story.
Yes.
If anyone's actually washed feet, though, like it's a whole experience, right? So I started hanging in the community with like a nurse who was doing like a lot of foot care for people, and this guy came clearly a little bit shy, but like had a close relationship with the nurse that I knew back then, and he like took off his shoes and socks, and I would be lying if I was like, "Whoa, straight to compassion," because it was not that, and I was like, "This is rank," and I remember thinking, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this just smells bad." It was not a good thing. I didn't enjoy being there, and then of course, the nurse Marge was like, "Hey, can you come and help me?" And I was like, "I'll come and help you." But I think to your point, like, I think for me, like the challenge in that moment was to be like, okay, if I really mean what I mean about believing in like the whole principle and why Jesus washed feet, then like I need to wrestle with being uncomfortable or disgusted by certain things.
When you think about drug use, there is a visceralness to it. And our response to needles and blood and the effects of drugs, or some drugs, is disgust. And I would want to say to a faith community, I would want to say to an everyday neighbor that in our evolutionary makeup, there is such a thing as physiological disgust. It's in a way to avoid risk, right? It's built into our physiology, right? If you smell rotten meat, in our evolution is this notion that if you smell rotten meat, don't eat it because it's going to harm you in some kind of physical way. And so when we see needles and when we see, some pretty raw scenarios, it's okay to feel disgust. And I think, I often hear people say that you shouldn't feel disgust, you should feel compassion. But I think you have to contend with the disgust to get to the compassion.
Sure, yeah.
And so
come to terms with it, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so there is also socio-moral disgust, right? This is Richard Beck writes on disgust. So there's physiological disgust, rotten meat, blood. Then there's socio-moral disgust, someone who is a part of a different political party or holds convictions that you find repulsive, and you feel actually a similar form of disgust, like it's coming from a similar place, but it's social and it's moral. The challenge with drug use, I think, with a lot of Christians as well as our neighbors, is they feel both kinds of disgust toward drug users, not just physiological disgust at the process by which people use drugs, but also a social and moral disgust. And so Beck, myself, would argue for hospitality to become a possibility, we all have to temporarily suspend disgust. Temporarily, right? So you cannot fully
get rid of it.
But if you can temporarily, in this kind of empathetic imagination, suspend disgust, even for a moment, to come to terms with the environmental factors that shape what we're talking about and all the other nuances, I think we get to better policy. Like, I don't think you should make policies based on disgust. I think disgust makes for bad policies. And so to make policy, to extend hospitality, it's this temporary suspension of disgust so that love and understanding and better futures become possible. But pretending that we don't feel disgust is a bad idea. It doesn't make you less moral to feel it. But I think we must transcend that, even if it's temporary. And I think Lo's done that for me in a lot of ways, through her interactions, through her sensibilities, through her way. And there are many people in our city who are helping us suspend disgust. And it feels gross even saying that I would feel disgust toward somebody. But pretending like that's not there doesn't lead to transformation, I don't think, or hospitality, or better policy. And so let's contend with the disgust and then deal with the nuances of what's going on here and help set up an environment that increases the probability of flourishing. Doesn't guarantee it, but increases the probability. And that is a complex thing to do. It would be easier to just punish people for using drugs. It is easier. If you use drugs, you go to jail. But of course, the environment in jail, as Lo would be able to speak to better than me, is not increasing the probability of flourishing. It is just another cage with its own traumas and isolation. And so often we're trying to solve a challenge by creating a whole bunch of new ones. It's easier to do that, though, than to deal with housing precarity, food inaccessibility, trauma, childhood trauma, present trauma, violence. That's pretty complicated. And yet, to not see those as interconnected into the whole would do policy as well as our neighbors a real disservice, I think.
Yeah, I think about disgust often. Like, I think, I grew up in a church too. Everybody loves the Jesus and the foot washing story.
Yes.
If anyone's actually washed feet, though, like, it's a whole experience, right? I remember, like, when I started working in the community and, like, so I started hanging in the community with, like, a nurse who was doing, like, a lot of foot care for people. And,
foot care.
And this guy came, clearly a little bit shy, but, like, had a close relationship with the nurse that I knew back then. And he, like, took off his shoes and socks. And I would be lying if I was like, whoa, straight to compassion. Because it was not that. And I was like, this is rank. And I remember thinking, I was like, oh my goodness. This just smells bad. It was not a good thing. I didn't enjoy being there. And then, of course, the nurse, Marge, was like, hey, can you come and help me? And I was like, I'll come and help you. But I think, to your point, like, I think for me, like, the challenge in that moment was to be like, okay, like, if I really mean what I mean about believing in, like, the whole principle and why Jesus washed feet, then, like, I need to wrestle with being uncomfortable or disgusted by certain things. And there's so many stories of things I've seen over the years, like maggots coming out of my friend's wound one time. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I did not know this was a thing. And I say that not to be like, look at me, I'm so great, I overcame that. But it was like, after years of doing this work and being around a lot of specific scenarios, I still feel that, like, oh, this, like, a physical, like, response. But I think the calling then to what it means to extend compassion and, like, love our neighbors is to be like, how do we put that aside and, like, engage with the person? And instead of, like, punishing the person with bad feet, to be like, why don't you change your socks? Right? I think we can ask better questions. And I think that's a whole idea for me around harm reduction, is actually, like, how do we ask better questions to understand the whole of a person and not just the one activity that they're doing? Like, if we talk about kids in schools, for instance, if there's a kid acting out, I use that in quotations, right? Like, if there's a kid acting out, we might address the behavior of, like, hey, why is little Sammy always, like, punching kids? But we would know as educators and as adults to be like, hey, something must be going on for Sammy. What else is going on in this kid's life that they're coming to school and beating up everybody, right? Like, we would ask other questions about, like, what's happening in this person's life. And I think with drug use in particular, I think we're often just so fixated on the one act of using substances, and
One
we
dimension.
don't exactly, and we forget actually, like, there's a whole person and a whole story behind them. And, like, I guess for me, like, the whole purpose of that faith with substance space was to encourage us to just ask more questions. I think curiosity is our best teacher.
I think the word that you're using, disgust, relates to me. I remember I was writing one point about the idea of loving your enemy requires that we actually feel like someone is an enemy. Okay. Like, it actually feels like they're your enemy and then you have to overcome that and then love the person, or else it would just be like love a random person or love someone who is lovable, all that stuff. There's many different things. The fact that it's love your enemy indicates that you have to grapple and come to terms with that person as someone perhaps you don't like, someone that you are threatened by. All those different things has to be felt first, and then you need to apply it. And I think right now what we, part of the social justice world of thinking about peace and loving everybody and seeing everyone as equals and human rights. The funny thing about it is that it makes you feel like, we should see everyone as a friend, we should get along. Don't judge them for that. And we avoid even to grapple with the disgust or grapple with the fear, because we're like, oh no, I'm not supposed to think that. Like, this is a human being. This the inherent dignity in this person should not make me think that. So we shove that aside, maybe delay it, and then kind of put pause on it. The funny thing is that in our very tolerant society, at the same time, while we're being tolerant, we're also not grappling with that feeling, and we're pushing it away completely, which is causing us to not have to like overcome it. In a way, sometimes ignoring it at times.